If your point of view is right, my point of view is wrong. And that's not true at all. What we learn about polarities and interdependence is that they're both right, and they can both be right, and they both have benefits, and we can get the positive outcomes of both.
Hi, and welcome to Lead Well. Welcome to the podcast interview today, Dr. Tracy Christopherson and Michelle. Oh, I should have asked how to pronounce your last name.
Troseth.
Troseth. Okay. Tracy, Michelle, welcome to Lead Well. I'm really looking forward to this conversation because you both challenge a very common assumption in leadership. Most leaders think that conflict is something to minimize, maybe even to avoid, or to resolve as quickly as possible. And you suggest something different. You suggest that tension is not a problem to eliminate, but a polarity to manage. And I think that is deeply relevant, especially right now. And because many leaders are exhausted, teams are fragile, psychological safety is talked about everywhere. And yet disagreement still feels risky. So today I'd love to explore what it really means to embrace tension, not as drama, not as ego, but as a source of resilience and clarity and sustainable performance. So let's dive right in.
Sounds great.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having us, Christine.
Yeah.
And Tracy and I, we really learned about polarities for our work together as leaders in the field. We worked together for over 20 years. Transforming healthcare actually is how we got our start. We met in hospital orientation 40 years ago. And we recognized that there was a tendency to always approach challenges and conflict as a problem to fix right away. To your point, people want to move in and resolve it. They're not comfortable with it. And then we really learned that it's not about a problem. There's really unavoidable polarities that exist in all of our leadership cultures and work cultures. And that's the work we do today.
So how would you define polarity?
Yeah, so a polarity is an interdependent pair of points of view or perspectives, values oftentimes. They appear to be opposite or contradictory to each other, but you actually have to have both if you want to reach a greater purpose. Now, let me give you an example that happens probably in homes with parents. Okay. So you have the one parent who is all about fun and freedom, wants their child to be able to make decisions and enjoy life. And you have the other parent who maybe is a little bit more around control and safety. They want the kids to remain safe. Those are two different points of view or perspectives, two different values. And there's a tension that exists between the two. So whether you are a parent that has that experience or you've been a child who has lived in a home like that, it can seem like conflict, but they're just different points of view and perspective. And over time, in order to have well-developed children that can make decisions on their own, they need that freedom and that avail. But they also know there are limits that, if we're too much freedom, it's chaos. If there's too much restriction, right, then they're not able to step into who they are and grow and evolve as people. So that's just a kind of an example that happens in the home. And there are hundreds in all aspects of our lives, in our communities, in our organizations that we experience personally. Even just activity and rest is another polarity that we are always having to balance. If you're a very active person, you need times of rest to rejuvenate, to rebuild yourself, right? To strengthen yourself. And yet you need to remain active for the same purposes and reasons.
So, I totally get it when there are two people that there is a polarity. How about in a corporate environment where there usually is one leader and a team? So where do polarities show up in that setting?
They show up there too. So some great examples of organizational polarities are hierarchy, the hierarchy that exists, and also the partnerships that exist in an organization. So your horizontal, vertical infrastructure, the way that it's designed. And if you're really being led by someone who is very dominant in the hierarchy pole and energy, then so many people live in the downside of not pole and being part of just very directive decision making, my way or the highway. So as a leader, it's really important to know what your preference pole is, to know what your dominant strength is or pole is, because others around you can actually experience the shadow side of that. And that's another reason it's so helpful to understand what's my preference pole in every polarity. But so that's one example. There's also individual and team is another corporate polarity. Managing and leading, that's a polarity. You can't just do leading without managing, and you can't do managing without leading. So those are some corporate examples.
And then when, as you just said, when I know my pole as a leader, so would your recommendation then be to look for like the opposite or another pole in my team so that I can have probably as much, not only polarity, but as much variety in my team as possible? Would that be fair to say?
Yes. Yeah. So we want to have a good balance of differing perspectives. Now, when you have a preference pole, any other position, point of view, or value can appear to be threatening because historically we have been taught to think in terms of either or. If I'm right, you're wrong. If this is the right answer, then anything else is the wrong answer. And so we are in this, we kind of grow up in this dichotomous thinking. So we often think our preference pole is the pole, the way. And tension and conflict arise when our perspective is challenged because we are in this dichotomous thinking. If I accept your point of view, I have to give up mine. If your point of view is right, my point of view is wrong. And that's not true at all. What we learn about polarities and interdependence is that they're both right and they can both be right and they both have benefits and we can get the positive outcomes of both. And we need to sit in that tension, knowing that it's just a different point of view, a different way to look at things. And so the more we can surround ourselves with the opposing perspective or a contradictory perspective, the more we're going to grow and evolve and the better chance we're going to have of achieving our shared purpose than we will if we only focus on one of those perspectives and give all of our attention to that. Like back to Michelle's example of directive decision-making and participative decision-making. Right? If everything is directive, we're missing out on all of the different experiences and wisdom and points of view that other people have that can drive a different decision and bring us to a different outcome. So that's an example of why that's really important to surround yourself. And then to sit in it, you need a couple of other skills. You need to be able to engage in meaningful dialogue with others. So really uncover what our differences are, why we believe what we believe, and we need to have healthy relationships. Those two things together help us to embrace these polarities and have a polarity mindset.
And then in addition to that, I would add, I also need the ability to know when to make a decision. And at the end of the day, as a leader, I have to make a decision. So yes, I can listen to everyone and I can involve them and I can make sure that I hear what they have to say. But at the end of the day, I think it's also important that then I take that decision and really also stand up for it. Isn't that true?
Yeah, that's true.
And it's both, right? There are times where it's important for you as the leader to be the decision maker. And there are times where the team can decide which direction we're going in. So it's really getting that clarity and understanding of when is each appropriate. And it may depend on the context for when you're doing that. But it's always both and. There will be times for participative and times that we need that directive. Like during COVID, right? That was a time of command and control, a lot of directive decision making. There wasn't the opportunity for the participative. That wasn't appropriate in that context.
And I love the point that you brought up family before, because it's the same. I mean, as parents, I want to listen to my children because yes, they have a personality as well, and they have opinions and they have to be heard. And at the end of the day, I need to make the decision. And the very same is true because I work a lot with people and their animals. I really am an advocate for the animals because they are personalities as well. They have personalities. They have an opinion. And I listen, but at the end of the day, I sometimes need to make the decision because they can't. Or
Right.
it's not, it's necessary to keep them safe, as we said before.
Yeah. And Christine, one of the things that I love about this work, and we wrote all about it in our book, Polarity, Intelligence, the Missing Logic in Leadership, is you often think that majority rules too in your decision making. It brings you to that voting place or wanting to garner everyone that does think like you. But when you understand how polarities actually work, you learn that maybe the few voices or that one animal's voice is equally as important as everyone else's. And you become very sensitized to that. And so you listen deeper. You may say to someone in a meeting or your child, "You're pretty quiet about this topic. What do you think about it?" So that you're drawing out all perspectives. That's really helpful because we're so used to just saying, how many yeses, how many no's, and going with the decision and not realizing there's going to be a negative consequence because we're not hearing that other perspective.
Now, I get it that tension is then healthy because, we might have, and I love the American saying, we agree to disagree. So we might have different opinions, but we can still be friends. So hopefully.
Yeah.
But there are people that I feel that they almost love conflict, and also they can become a bit destructive. So how can a leader, how can even someone in a family distinguish between a healthy tension and a destructive conflict?
Well, if it is a healthy tension, then we actually need both points of view to get to a different place. Not all conflict is a polarity. There are sometimes, to your point, where people are just being contradictory to push your buttons or poke the bear or whatever you want to call it, right? So I think it's when you understand that that the two are connected to each other, right? They're bound together with an energy. And you have to understand a little bit about how polarities work, that they work in a dance. So when you can recognize that these are actually an interdependent pair of values or points of view or perspective, that we absolutely do have to have both. Then it's about using healthy relationships and meaningful dialogue to get a deeper understanding of that person's point of view or why they're being so contradictory, right? What is it? Oftentimes they've had an experience that you haven't had. And oftentimes they've experienced living in what we call the downside of maybe your point of view. They've had a bad experience when they've gone down that road before, and they're not going there again. And they're just going to put their feet down and I'm not moving, right? That resistance. So whenever you meet up with that kind of resistance, there's wisdom there. It's not something to just say, oh, they're just being difficult. Let's just move on without them. It's about exploring and using those tools, those skills of dialogue, asking deep questions. Tell us what your experience has been about this. What maybe do you know that we don't know? Getting them to advocate for their perspective, their point of view, why they're feeling resistant. That's where you're going to really learn. And it's easier to engage in that dialogue when the relationship is based on a shared purpose. Where, whether that's at home or in the organization, wherever you are, we're here for a purpose. And there's a shared purpose when we're together as a group, and keeping the focus on that. We're here to get to a certain place and really kind of investigating if this is just somebody who's being contradictory, or do they really have something important to share that will help us move forward in a different way. And like Michelle said, sometimes it's that one voice, that one person that can bring a perspective nobody else had, and it can totally change the direction of where you're headed, what you're doing.
Now, you mentioned communication skills and being able to listen and ask questions. And I love that because I always, when I was teaching at business school, I always ask my students there, what do you think is the most important skill a manager or a leader has to have? And they came up with everything. And I'm an advocate of saying you need to be able to ask the right questions and listen. Thanks for saying that. Thanks for
Yes.
confirming that. What other skills and competencies do you feel a leader that can live with this polarity and can fully leverage the polarity? What kind of skills and competencies do they need to have?
Well, we wrote about meaningful dialogue and healthy relationships because we just definitely recognize just knowing about polarities is not enough. And I would say one of the first principles in both of those skill sets is intention. Just always developing the skill set is, what is my intention in the situation? Or explaining to another person, my intention in asking you this question is because I want to understand you more, or whatever it is. And the power of intention cannot be underestimated. And again, both healthy relationships and meaningful dialogue start with that as a core principle for you to apply in communication.
And I love that, because you also have to ask yourself, well, what is my intention?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So I think another skill is leading yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So before you can lead anybody else, you have to lead yourself. You have to be in good relationship with yourself. You have to be able to have dialogue with yourself, really, to really uncover, what are my intentions? What is, what's underneath my resistance to another point of view? And then I would say the other thing is to create psychological safety amongst the team. And when you can do that, you can create a very safe culture where you won't experience somebody just trying to poke the bear, right? Or being contradictory they know they're there together for a purpose. And I think creating that healthy culture with psychological safety and a foundation of, this is how we will be in relationship with each other. We will honor these principles and live by them, and we will honor these ways of communicating. And really setting that expectation. This is who we are and how we will work together. And then letting that be the guardrails of all the conversations, the tensions that arise. And it gives everybody that opportunity to explore them, to sit in it, and to leverage it when it's beneficial to do so.
Now, you mentioned something very important, the psychological safety. And I think the way you said it, you need to make sure that it's there. I think it's a very hard thing to do, to make sure that there is psychological safety. How can I create psychological safety for my team? What do I need to do? What's the prerequisite?
I think you need to let them know that that's what your intention is. But I think a lot of it comes down to listening, and that it's okay to create a shared space for us to learn together. And I think that's what's so powerful about dialogue. It's about learning together, and that they don't feel like they're going to be at risk if they share their understanding of something or them questioning of something. So I think part of it needs to be named. And then I think a lot of it's just culture, about just that energy that you're carrying and really welcoming them into a space and a conversation as well.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say is being integral. So you have to be self-integral. First, integral with yourself, your actions, your statements, and then integral with the group. And when you set that culture and say, this is who and how we are going to be together, you have to live it to the 10th degree. You cannot waver from it. You need to be, the role model for everybody in that culture. And that psychological safety happens over time. And it happens through integrity and through your actions and demonstrating that I can believe in this, that this is how we are and who we are together. But again, this is not something the leader owns on their own. This has to be a group effort. This has to be a team effort, because the leader alone can't create that container. It has to be created collectively. And that's why I think when you have those guardrails, that's really helpful. Now, another tool that we often use with leaders is partnership agreements. So that's where we say, this is what you can expect from me, and this is what I need from you, and this is how we are going to be in relationship with each other. And that gives them the opportunity to come to you and say, this is what you told me I could rely on, and I'm not getting that right now. So help me understand why it appears you're going back on your word or why you're acting in a different manner. Same for the leader and the people in the team. So it gives them those kind of guardrails to work by. And I think that's very, very helpful because it puts everything in concrete, black and white. Here's what I said. Here's what you said. Here's what we agreed to. And when things get off the rails, you get an opportunity to explore why. And there may be things you don't know of that are happening for that person in their life, and they're not who they typically are. And that happens for all of us at different times. So that gives you a way to safely say, hey, I'm not getting what I said I would, what you said I would get.
Yeah. So open communication, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And really being proactively communicating if there is something that I feel is off.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, if someone listening would like to start tomorrow or maybe even today to accept polarity and live with polarity, where should they start?
Well, we have a book website called polarityintelligence.com, and we have information in there about the book. And we also have some resource pages because one of our goals is we don't want people just to think of this as a theory. We want them to really apply it in their businesses, in their homes, with their teams. So we wrote the book in a way that is very practical. So that would be the first place I would send them. And then Tracy and I also have a podcast called Burnout Proof Leadership. And we drop 2 episodes a week. And every Friday we have what we call a polarity spotlight. And so we take a current trend, something that's happening current day, and we can shine a spotlight on it to really point out the polarity that's underneath of it and just how it shows up in our lives every day. So we have that as well.
That sounds really interesting because then I can practice to also recognize polarity.
Yes. That's the step. Just look for them, right? Look for them. That's the key. Yeah.
Do you have any daily practice? I usually suggest micro practices because I know that we all don't have a lot of time, but is there any micro practice that would help build tolerance for discomfort in this polarity?
I think self-awareness is a practice that just really becoming very aware of yourself and pay attention to how you're feeling, because that tension, sometimes you can feel it and then become aware of it and then ask yourself those questions like, why am I feeling like this? Does this person have a different person? Is this a polarity? Is this a problem of a polarity or both? And just start asking yourself that question, just self-awareness. Tracy, what would you say?
Yeah, I think, what we didn't talk about is the difference between a problem and a polarity. So a problem has an endpoint.
Yeah.
You're going to maybe have a few different solutions you can apply. You're going to apply one and it's going to go away. It's like, what are we having for dinner tonight? You might have 3 different options. You don't eat all 3. You just choose one and you're done, right? But polarities are ongoing, so they never end. So the other practice would be if there's what appears to be a problem showing up over and over and over, you just can't solve it. That's an indicator it's actually a polarity, not a problem. So always looking for those things that, didn't we just address this? Or I thought we took care of this. Why is this back? That's an indicator that you've got a polarity, not a problem, and you need to start looking at it through a different lens.
Wow. I now have an internal polarity that says I would love to continue the conversation with you. On the other hand, the episode will get too long maybe, so we have to come to an end here.
Make the decision, Christine. Make the decision.
That's right.
I made the decision here to thank you so much because, it was really interesting. A great perspective, great viewpoint. I love that idea of saying, well, there is this tension, so let's live with the tension and let's not try to avoid that. Mm-hmm. And I can only say thank you so much for coming and sharing your ideas about polarities.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you, Christine.
This was Lead Well. Now, what is the one thing that you're taking away from this episode? Please share in the comments below and do share the podcast with your friends and family, but only if you like it.